This is a Tektro Auriga Pro hydraulic disc brake caliper, and this is a Tektro 160mm disc brake rotor. And the problem I'm having with this rear disc brake system is it no longer works correctly. The rear brake will no longer lock up the wheel, and it squeaks really bad. What I think is causing this brake problem is at some point somebody got an oil or something on these brake pads, probably brake fluid. You should never get brake fluid, oil, any grease, anything. You want to keep the brake pads, the brake rotor, as clean as possible. Anyway, somebody got something on those pads and it ruined the braking performance. And I've already tried. I tried cleaning the rotor, and I took the pads off, and I took some emery paper, and I took off the surface of the brake pads and reassembled everything, and that didn't help. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to disassemble this, clean the rotor again, and replace the brake pads with some new pads. For the first step, I'm going to clean the caliper and the brake rotor, and I'm going to use, you can use either isopropyl rubbing alcohol, which you can get at any drugstore, or acetone, which is the main ingredient in this brake cleaner. I'm going to use the brake cleaner only because it's just easier to apply. So I'm going to spray down the brake rotor and the caliper. And take a rag and kind of wipe down the caliper. And wipe down the brake rotor, and you want to do this until it comes out clean. The acetone won't hurt your paint. And you can see that's clean now. Now I'm ready to remove the caliper to get to the brake pads. There's a couple of ways of doing this. I could either take the wheel off and leave the caliper attached to the frame and then take the pads out, and that would eliminate having to readjust this caliper when I reattach it to the frame. But for the sake of this video, I'm going to take this off just because it's easier to see things. So you just remove these two mounting bolts that mount the caliper to the frame. It's 5mm. And then you can take the caliper off. Next step is to remove this bolt here that secures the brake pads to the caliper. But before you can remove it, there's a clip on the other side that you need to remove. Probably be easier with needle nose pliers, but let's see. You can see it right here. So after you remove that, then take a 3mm Allen and remove that bolt. Now, before I completely remove the old brake pads, I want to spread I want to push the pistons in the caliper back in so that I make more room for the new brake pads. And you can either use a plastic tire tool or just use a screwdriver. They do make a special tool to do this, which I don't have, but a screwdriver works. And you don't have to be rough, just lightly push the pistons back in by inserting the screwdriver, and you're trying to separate the pads, make that area in between the pads larger to push the pistons back into the caliper. Then after you've done that, just push the old pads out and remove them. Now before I install the new pads, I want to give this brake rotor one more cleaning. And take my rag and give it a good wipe down. Just want to make sure everything is off of that brake rotor so I do not contaminate the new brake pads. There's probably a couple of things I should talk about before when installing new brake pads. Brake pads are available in different materials. You can either get them in an organic material or a semi-metallic, and there are disadvantages and advantages to each one, and sometimes they will make rotors that for example, will only use an organic, or they call the organic resin pads. And if you have a rotor like that, somewhere on the rotor it will be written only use resin type brake pads, RESIN, if I'm not pronouncing that correctly. With this bike, that's not an issue. I can use either the organic or the semi-metallic with this rotor. And what I chose to do is just get OEM original equipment Tektro disc brake pads, and they are right here. You want to be very careful and not. I try not to even touch the brake pad area, which is. This is the brake pad area. This is the backing part of it. So I want to keep that as clean as possible. Good thing to do before you install the new pads is take that isopropyl alcohol, put some on a rag, a little bit too much, and just wipe your hands down. Get all the crap off of your hands. Now take your new pads. There's two of them, and there's a spring that separates the pads. You want the spring to be in between them, like this. So when they're assembled, it looks like this. And there's a hole for that securing bolt up at the top here that needs to line up in both pads and that spring. And then just take your disc brake caliper and insert the pads into the caliper. Why is that not going? There it goes. Now take the bolt used to secure the pads to the caliper. Insert the bolt, make sure it goes through both pads and the spring, and tighten it down. And then reinstall that clip on the end of the bolt. And this is everything reinstalled, and you see the two brake pads, spring in there. There's the retaining bolt, and then the clip on the other side, and here's the underside. How it looks, and your rotor will go right in between the pads. Now I slipped the caliper back on the bike, reinstall the mounting bolts. I'm not going to tighten, just lightly snug them and then back them off just a hair on both of them. And then grab your brake lever and engage the brake to center it, and then tighten it down. Now just take your wheel, turn it, make sure that the rotor isn't rubbing against the pads when the brake is not engaged. Your objective here when I engaged the brake right before I tightened down the mounting bolts was to center the brake so that the brake pads are parallel with the brake rotor. That way they engage the rotor evenly and they will wear evenly. So that is how you change the brake pads in a Tektro Auriga Pro brake caliper.